Okay, well, good afternoon and welcome to the online session of the Research Festival Institute of Digital Futures session today. We've seen this morning's quite interesting series of presentations by the research centres aligned with the digital priority challenges on campus. And today it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Gerry Reilly to this first keynote speech of the afternoon. Gerry is no new to Brunel. Gerry is a Brunel alumnus, for those of you who don't know it. And he is currently a visiting professor at Brunel University. So Gerry is actually a technologist in residence at the Health Data Research UK. He's the design authority for the UCRI Data and Analytics Research Program, which probably is going to be touched upon in Gerry's keynote today. He will explore the future of trustworthy research on sensitive personal data today, with particular attention given to the governance matters, the ethical issues, but also the basic functionalities of the TRE, the Trusted Research Environments. So he will look at the current evolution of TREs, some of the work that's been done and it's currently being done on privacy enhancements, privacy enhancing technologies, and the progress towards a federated approach to TREs to undertake research on sensitive and personal data in the future. So the way we structure is that Gerry will lead his presentation, and then we'll leave 10 to 15 minutes towards the end of the hour to open the floor for questions and have a discussion around the topic. Gerry, welcome.
Thank you, Abdul. It's a really great pleasure to be able to present this afternoon. And I'm going to share my slides, so it'll have patience for a moment. And we always hope that it behaves well when we do this. So let me right. Hopefully you can see my slides. So I will. Excellent. So thank you for that great introduction. So what I want to do over this hour is really look at how things have evolved over the last couple of years around the approaches to research on sensitive data and how it looks like they are going to evolve over the next few years. So I'm going to focus in on the work around trusted research environments, and not just around the technology, but as Abdul said, also around some of the governance and ethics challenges that exist. And I'm going to also touch briefly on privacy enhancing technologies. I've decided not to spend a huge amount of time on any particular privacy enhancing technology, though very happy to get into discussion during the questions or later around the potential for things like homomorphic encryption. So the first question is one that might appear initially quite obvious, but it's what do we mean by sensitive data? So in the introduction, Abdul touched on the fact that I'm the design authority for the UKRI Data Analytics Research Environments Programme, which I'm going to call DARE for now because otherwise it's a bit of a mouthful. And in fact, as we went into that, we're in a sort of initial design and dialogue phase at the moment of that program. Just what we mean by sensitive data has become a really interesting discussion, because there's some elements of this that are very clear cut. There's some elements of this that are much more nuanced. So clearly, when we're talking of data that includes personally identifiable information such as names, addresses, perhaps NHS numbers, we're clearly working with data that is clearly personally identifiable, therefore potentially disclosive. But as we look even at de-identified data, data that's had that personal identifiable information removed, there's certainly still a risk of re-identification and disclosure when that data is either linked with other data or where somebody has possession of other knowledge alongside that data. But also, it's increasingly the case, and I primarily work in the health data space, but it's increasingly the case that we're looking at data that spans research domains, health data, social research data, even environmental data. And again, there is the potential for disclosure or indeed harm where you might link. So it might not, for example, be immediately obvious that, say, floodplain data could result in harm. But if you're trying to sell your property, the fact that your property is related to some aspect of floodplain data might actually present you with an advantage, or indeed you might want to know that information about a property you buy. So sensitivity is quite nuanced. For this discussion, I'm going to narrow it down a little bit. I'm going to narrow it down into personal data. And that's data that could be health, but it could also be social. As I think that becomes the core. And if we get that right, we get many of the other things right. So, and that is where the program I lead for UKRI is really focused at the moment. We're focused on taking some of the work that's gone on out of ESRC and MRC to look at what the future should be for how we address secure, trustworthy research on sensitive data in a way that we retain patient and public trust. So first thing, what are we worried about? And harms come in many forms, and I really recommend going and having a look at this paper if you really want to look at this in a bit more depth. It can be about re-identification, and can you take the data? Is it in an environment where you actually prevent or at least seriously restrict the ability to re-identify? Is it around disclosure? Is it around the security of that data? And harm could be loss of data as well as re-identification. So there's a range of types of harm. Daniel, in this paper, Daniel Solovey looked at 7. The one that probably is the one that hits the Daily Express, the Daily Mail test, is that one where people are re-identified from the data. It's possible to re-identify a person from the data, and that there is some element of this that is disclosive, that it results in potential harm to that individual. So one of the dynamics that we've seen in health over the last probably 4 years has been a move away from the default approach of where you conduct research. If I look back, I joined Health Data Research UK in 2018. At that point, the starting point for the vast majority of research, not all of it, the vast majority of research in the health data space was around data distribution. You applied for data, you went through a rigorous assessment of your credibility, of your project's credibility. So you went through a very strong, in most cases, a very strong ethics approach. But at the point where you were approved, the point you signed your data management plan, the data was distributed to you with the trust that you would undertake that research on your systems in a very secure and trustworthy way, that you would maintain that data and you would delete that data at the appropriate point. We've moved from that model increasingly to a model where the default answer for most research, particularly most research on unconsented sensitive data, is with that research happening within a trusted research environment. And that is a trajectory that I strongly predict will just become more dominant over the next few years. Many of you, or some of you, will have seen the recent announcement by the NHS of the investments it's making in what it terms secure data environments, which include trusted research environments, but both covering both clinical and research use cases. That major investment, I think, is another indicator that we are headed down a trajectory away from data distribution, away from data travel, to research occurring in trusted research environments, which have retained strong ethics, strong governance processes around them, plus a robust approach to cybersecurity. So just what is a trusted research environment? And there are some fabulous examples out there. You have the Cell Data Bank hosted out of Swansea. You have the Secure Research Systems hosted out of the Office of National Statistics. You have the NHS digital platform that has been live and hosts, for example, the British Heart Foundation research that's been live for the last, well, probably headed on for 12 months. So there's some really good examples out there. At the heart of a trusted research environment is an environment that could provide secure compute, secure storage of data, a tools environment that allows researchers to conduct research within that environment without the data traveling outside of that secure domain. So we can ensure that we have the capability of controlling that data, controlling any linkage, and controlling access and controlling what eventually gets exported from that environment. The intent is to build research environments that can make collaboration secure, research efficient, but also cost efficient. I mean, one of the other motivators, and I think it will become increasingly a motivator as we look ahead of a few years, is trusted research environments also allow us to be much more cost effective in how we provide research capability in the UK. And as we start to look, for example, at the UKRI's mission to get to net zero infrastructure by 2040, we do need to think about how we're addressing those things. So the TRE provides the ability from a remote, generally a remote capability. This is one of the things actually shifted to some extent during the pandemic, to access the data, access the tools in one place, a bit like a reference library. It's no longer a lending library. You don't go and borrow the books, take it home and study, but you read it and you work at it in situ. There are really 5 core characteristics that came out of what a trusted research environment is. And these came out actually out of work from the ONS, but have now been widely adopted. We championed these from inside HDR UK for the last 4 years. And whilst they do need some refining, and I'll touch on maturity models towards the end of the presentation, they do give you a good view of what the objectives are and the type of characteristics that need to be developed. This is still a journey. TREs are not perfect. So, safe people. We need to be in a world where we can trust identity, and the only people that will get access to that are people who are approved researchers. We want to make sure that there's a rigorous approach for accrediting those researchers that is efficient. And actually, as we look at being able to do research across different research environments, an approach that is agreed that we can apply not just in a siloed way, but as a federated accreditation, a federated identity management. We need to ensure that the research is made available for projects that benefit the patient and public. Those of us who work in the sensitive data space always need to be cognizant of the fact that we do research on people's data. They lend us the data for that work. It isn't ours, it's their data. So we have an overriding duty on us to ensure that the work we do genuinely benefits the public and for health data, the patients. We need to ensure the research happens within a robust environment. So it's a secure environment. Um, some of these environments provide access to direct to the data. Some increasingly, for instance, Open Safely, led by Professor Ben Goldacre, have gone a step further, and actually the analysis is run with never having access to the raw record level data at all. So there are steps for some data that even go beyond this, but it occurs within a secure setting, and there is no data travel beyond that secure setting or settings. The data itself, a lot, particularly within the health data space, but elsewhere as well, is that it's unconsented data. So you may have consented data for things like clinical trials, but a lot of research occurs on routinely collected data, and therefore we need to make sure that data is secure, it's appropriately de-identified, and that we stick to the requirements that exist for data minimization. We only have the data that's necessary for the purpose for the research that we wish to conduct. And highly critically, the last one, which is safe outputs, that we look, and as we export from the environment, if you want to publish your research after all, we're ensuring that we are not leaking information that potentially could be disclosive. This is a challenging area. It's an area I think open for some really interesting research, because this is, in nearly all cases, is a highly intense manual process of output checkers looking over results before they're exported back to the researcher. This is, in my view, open to levels of automation that can support the process and actually allow us to scale these environments. Also, manual checking is really difficult when it comes to things like checking if we're doing machine learning, that the model being exported is not potentially disclosive, because the weightings within the model actually encapsulate some of the knowledge of the underlying data, which clearly they will do, because that's why you train the model. So these are the 5 safe people, safe projects, safe settings, safe data, safe outputs that characterize what a trusted research environment should look like from the point of view of its characteristics. And these are governance, ethics, and technology. And as I said, this is an approach that is now widely adopted across the health space. It was already the approach taken by ONS, and is increasingly seeing adoption across an international forum, and has been widely and well received. It's also, when I talk to patient and public groups, it's an approach that actually does engender more confidence than other approaches that involve data travel. There are many within the UK, not an exclusive list, but I just wanted to pull out what we consider to be the some of the TRE environments that exist around the UK. And some of these are domain specific, some of these are at national level, some are also coming from the commercial space, and the commercial space will continue to have an important play. From a technology point of view, this is a ready mix of on-premise technologies, hybrid cloud, and increasingly public cloud. And therefore, there is a need to actually look at how we build out those technologies and build out sort of blueprints of how to do this in with best practice. So just touching, and I'm not going to dive though in really deep into the technology because we have an hour and that would be many days. But in a sense, this is a quick representation, so a stratification of a typical approach to trusted research environments. So they aren't necessarily the data controllers. The data controllers might be a whole range of organizations, so the data custodians, who would have their data available within the trusted research environments. And the trusted research environment is providing typically now a remote access. Prior to the pandemic, in some cases, such as the SRS, or indeed some of the more sensitive work at Cell Data Bank, you had to be physically present, but obviously the last 2 years changed that a little bit. But provide secure team workspaces, remotely accessed with strong accreditation. We are seeing most now have metadata catalogs, which allow us to enable discovery of characteristics and data sets across the trusted research environments within the UK. And they will support the minimized data sets that we touched on the previous slides with typically a set of tools and analytics capabilities within the environment. Some will support you as a researcher bringing in your own tools. Some will also support you bringing in through an import capability, an ingress capability, your own data. All will have a secure capability, an egress capability that requires output checking. And increasingly, as I will touch on as we come through to the back end of the presentation, to collaborate that allows federated discovery, federated query, and federated analytics. There are limitations, and some of these limitations are the challenges that we are working through at the moment, and again, open up some really interesting areas of research. These have developed as siloed environments, and pre-pandemic pretty much were siloed environments. We have started to see through the last 2 years some harmonization and actually some good use cases that have been federated. So, for example, the national level TREs in Wales and in England collaborated over looking at adverse cardiovascular incidents following COVID, which allowed the research to be conducted over a much larger population base. So that some of that was automated, and it is beginning to scale up, and that will be an area of much focus. The technology of doing that is complex, but quite manageable. The governance of how we manage federated analysis, how we aggregate outputs, how we do meta-analysis on those outputs across different domains, possibly different jurisdictional domains, is a really interesting area to look at. We also need to be able to make data more readily available. And we need to be able to federate our TREs so that not only do we have the research occurring in trusted research environments and minimize data flow, there are situations we will need to flow data. So we need to flow data between trusted research environments. We need to be able to build up a trust network where we can conduct research, because in some cases you have got to aggregate data, you've got to link data in a way that allows you to do some of the analysis in one environment, but actually still having distributed trust. So if I allowed my data to be moved to another environment, I still want control over the safe outputs. I want control over the data destruction at the end of the research. Indeed, I may even have judicial constraints on me that enforce that. We also want to make sure the research environments themselves have the capability. So we need to look at how do we take the research environments and integrate in with HPC, HTC capability? How do we integrate them in with GPUs? It's not going to be efficient to have those capabilities at each TRE. So we need to look at how we can share that capability. And we also, from a user research point of view, we need to get over the barriers of it. I'm going to have a wonderful environment on my local research environment. I must be as efficient in a TRE as I am doing my research locally. So the next step is to move from where we are today, which is with one step away from being siloed environments, towards having a federated network of interoperable TREs across the UK at national level, domain level, local level, with low barriers of entry, but that still is secure and supports those fundamental 5 concepts. So this is the work that the DARE program is looking at broadly across the pan-UKRI councils, and HDI UK in collaboration with ESRC is looking at for health and social data, social and economic data. So we want to be able to build a capability that provides us a federated approach for discovery, access, analysis, and dissemination, communications of results. So we need to, over the next few years, start to build out a federated set of services. We need to federate metadata catalogs across the UK so that we can discover what access is, what data is available and where. We need to be able to look into that data so that if we want to do research, we understand where and how to build cohorts. We've got to build out, and there's been work around federated identity management for many years. We've got to deliver on that vision so that we have a federated approach to identity management and accreditation. And we've got to be able to do workflow execution across TREs so that in those situations where, for example, we're running equivalent analysis across the 4 nations, the UK, we can ship queries, run queries locally, automate the aggregation of the results, and be able to do the meta-analysis with a secure environment. Now, clearly that is a workflow shipping problem. It's also in some cases, a very heavy data curation, harmonization, or at the very least data mapping problem, not to underplay the challenges that exist there. Though COVID has shown where there's enough motivation, we can actually get over some of those challenges. And we need to do that within TREs that exist today, but also within TREs that will emerge. We're not going to move to a world of a single data lake. That is no, I don't think that's ever realistic, nor in my opinion, desirable option. And therefore, we need to be able to build out best of breed approaches to trusted research environments that can be deployed locally or within public cloud environments. So federation, I group federation into 4 main areas, and there's great research opportunity on both the technology, but also the governance and ethics that flows alongside this. It's around identity management. Can we provide a common approach to identity management, identity brokerage across research environments in the UK? It's about being able to provide federation of analytics and actually to provide a world where not only can we do federation, but we're reusing those capabilities as well. We're making progress on metadata federation. We do have metadata catalogs that are federated and interoperable in deployment in a number of places already. That will evolve. And it's being more flexible about the infrastructure itself so that it's secure. We can move data between secure environments in a secure way, adopting some of the privacy enhancing technologies as and when appropriate, but also so that we can make a better use of computational resource for specialist requirements. So as I mentioned earlier, increasing need for large GPU clusters for machine learning. We can't be deploying that. UKRI has 754 infrastructures listed on its infrastructure portal when I looked a few days ago. We can't be deploying that in even a fraction of those. So we've got to come up with a way of securely sharing that sort of capability across the infrastructures that we use in the UK. But importantly, we've also got to come to a maturity model. Not every environment is the same, nor does every environment need to be the same. There is different levels of sensitivity, and therefore we need to look at the building out a maturity model. And these are just some of the initial thinking that we've been going through that I thought I'd share around how mature a TRE environment is, and indeed for the nature of the work that's being done. If it's pure population level research with very low risks of disclosure, you may not need to be right through a maturity model. If it's linkage of really highly sensitive data, particularly data that may not even be de-identified, we need to be at very mature levels of capability, and possibly still in those environments where there is physical research is conducted within the building, where you've got CCT, you've got key trackers and everything else. And finally, we've got to look at risk-based governance. We've got to start to model risk so that we understand what is appropriate in terms of the level of governance, the level of data access requests management, and I'll touch on that one in a moment, and the level of security that's really required. So we've got to start to build acceptable models where we can model the risks around the data, the risks around the data that it might be linked to, or the other prior knowledge that might be available to the researcher, the risks of an actual attack, because for some of this data, whilst it's theoretically, it may be the case that I could re-identify, there's very little advantage to an attack, and therefore the risks are probably lower than for some other situations. So we've got to get to a way of thinking about risk and risk stratification in a way that we can model, because how we control this is really around those. Think of the 5 safes as nearly that amplifier on the front of your hi-fi if you're old enough, or your stack where you're playing your guitar. You've got a lot of knobs you can turn. You don't need to turn all the knobs all the way up. So it's around that control, but also it's around making sure this is an efficient environment. The UK has a poor reputation for the speed of how we handle data access requests to sensitive data. So we've got to be able to shift where we turn those controls so that where we are handling data access requests, we apply the right resources to the most sensitive data, and we don't end up with turnaround cycles on data requests that take months, and in fact, some cases even years, that prevent hugely important research occurring that has huge potential for patient and public benefit. And we've got to also turn the dials appropriately at the end of the research so that we are looking at what outputs come out and ensuring that we can build capability and tools and governance so that we ensure that we are not leaking information, we're not being disclosive at the endpoint of our research, but again, are efficient and can actually scale our research and our environments. So with that, I'll take a little bit of a pause. I hope that's given you some thoughts to raise as questions, and I will hand back to Abdul.
Fantastic. What's a comprehensive vision of TREs and how research is to be undertaken securely on personal and sensitive data. This is great stuff. If I am to put this in the context of academic research, if I may, Gerry, you know, in an academic environment, when in some cases, not in all cases, in most cases, I would say, research is conducted on data which is not available within the university boundaries. So we tend to use data which is available in repositories of information, could be located in national sites, but also international sites. What makes it even more complicated is that this research is not conducted only by researchers who belong to Brunel University, but we work collaboratively with researchers elsewhere in other institutions, whether academic or otherwise. Now, it's in a sense similar, the way things are going now, in a way similar to what happens in a mobile network, where either processing is handled by the core network, but in more advanced technologies, it could be handled by the edge of the network, with the core completely oblivious to what's going on the edges, as it were. So what's your take on the future TREs with academic institutions involved, particularly in relation to collaborative type of research model, where you've got not just a single partner, a single university, but multiple partners working on the same data and the same piece of research?
So yeah, really good question. The majority of the work that's actually going on in TREs today is actually academic research. We're probably, from an academic community, a couple of years ahead of where the commercial research sector is. They've been slower to adopt. They're a little more reluctant to move to trusted research than academic. The advantage of the TRE approach, particularly where it is not tied to a single institution, is actually if we can get to a model of shared identity, AAAI at some sort of national framework, we can enable research much more effectively within TREs. But even today, we've got some great examples. British Heart Foundation work that actually occurs within the NHS digital TRE environment is a collaboration across many academic institutions. And because it's not tied to a particular academic institution, that works very smoothly. Where this does become at the moment a little more challenging is international collaboration. And again, many researchers will be doing international collaboration, and there is still a lot of work to be done on how we ensure that we can do that international collaboration and retain the security and the trust and the accreditation. There are some good examples where this is occurring. The International COVID-19 Data Alliance work was very effective with researchers from many countries, but it isn't at a point yet where that's generalizable across many of the TREs. So we've got it working really well. There are some gaps. Not having a single accreditation system is a flaw. ONS have that. If you want to work on census data, the ONS has a single, nice, simple, certainly a single and relatively simple approach to accreditation. We've got to address that for other data domains. Works well for collaboration across the UK. Work needed still to get it to work internationally, and for it to be adopted from a commercial point of view. Now, one of the challenges on international and commercial is public perception. There is really strong, we've recently been doing quite a lot of public engagement activity. There is really strong public support for research on personally sensitive data if that occurs by UK academics within UK environments. It's relatively supported where it occurs by commercial companies, with some exceptions. It's much more nuanced from an international perspective. So we've got work. So there's some areas that are really good, some areas still needing further work.
Excellent. Okay, I've got another one, but perhaps from the lay person in me, not from the data technologist or data researcher side. You know, what's wrong with having two versions of a data item? Any data item could have two different versions. One that has all the details, including the personal stroke sensitive aspects of data, but there's the other version whereby all these details have been stripped off. So you have a version of data which is ready to be researched on or accessed by external parties without necessarily breaching the confidentiality or the privacy features of the data. And this is the bit that you want to make accessible for research purposes. So why do we need to think about TREs and how research is going to be conducted securely on data repositories going forward if we can come up with a certain model whereby every data item and any data item will have two versions for it?
So the two version world actually works quite well. And it's actually conceptually the thinking behind a lot of what the NHS is looking at for the secure data environments. And that is that there is an inward focused version, which is identifiable and usable for clinical intervention. Because clearly, if you're a clinician involved in the treatment of your patient, you need to have a fully identified version. So there's an inward-facing version and then a research-ready version, which has been appropriately de-identified. Now, the problem there is, what does de-identification actually mean? And this is, in a sense, why the public have become more keen on even de-identified data remaining within trusted research environments, because that data, any sufficiently rich set of data that starts off as personally identifiable is likely to retain characteristics that can be fairly cause some people to be fairly quickly re-identified. So as an example that's quite often used, the HES data set, the hospital episodes data set, is de-identified. However, any reasonably competent, probably with a certain amount of motivation, can identify certain people within that data set. Because if I know that Tony Blair had a couple of instances of mild cardiac issues at particular dates, which are reported in the press, they're in the public press, I know those dates. And therefore, I can actually go into HES and with those dates and knowing which hospital he was treated in, which is also in the public domain, I can identify Tony Blair's records within the HES dataset. Having identified Tony Blair's records within the HES dataset, I then know what the unique de-identified identifier is for Tony Blair within that dataset. I now know every other record of Tony Blair's record within the HES data set. So you've still got to the controls over de-identification are important but insufficient, and therefore you're absolutely right. In many cases we should have two versions of this data, a research ready version that may be linked to other data sets indeed as well, and a identifier one used for perhaps if it's health data for clinical intervention. But even for the research one, it's still potentially disclosive. And therefore we still need that to occur within a trusted research environment where we have controls over what might get exported. Now, even when you have those controls in place, the technology doesn't solve all your problems. The technology provides you part of it, but the governance and the ethics around secure accreditation of your researchers, you don't want your journalists going in there. You've got to make sure that these are bona fide researchers going in, the purpose for which they're doing the research, and the controls on access are all as important as the technology that underpins this.
Yeah, very good. How do you see the future of TRE formation going to happen? Do you see TREs are going to be sectoral? So there will be TREs formed within the healthcare domain, others within social science research, and every colony of TREs will be sector or theme based? Or do you see TREs will be institutional? So for instance, Brunel will have its own TRE or suite of TREs in the future. Institution X or Y externally will have their own TREs, and then you'll have an agglomeration of TREs across institutions. Or is that going to be a combination of things, how TREs are going to be defined?
My personal view is it's going to be a combination of different approaches. We're at a really interesting point. There's quite a lot of tension about that very question at the moment. There is a school of thought that actually what we need is a relatively small number of TREs that are available across the different communities. So a small number of national level TREs, a small number of TREs that are effectively collaborations, and that we shouldn't be encouraging widespread proliferation so that there are thousands of TREs and people having to worry about how you stand it up, how you operationalize these. There is a completely opposite school of thought, which is there will be a very wide range of TREs, some of which will genuinely be large national level TREs, such as the systems run by the ONS, both the current one and the new platform that's about to go live. But that there will then be specialist domain level environments. There will be institutional level environments. There may be even just project level environments. You might be running a program with two or three or other collaborators, and you might just want to spin up a TRE that's possibly transitory. It might exist for the period of a grant and not want to do anything more. I'm inclined to the latter. I think that what we need to do is ensure best practice from a cybersecurity point of view, from a technology point of view, and from an ethics and governance point of view, but not constrain invention around how people approach what they need from TREs. I think we need to be looking at technology. Can we build blueprints? Can we build best practices? Can we make joining into federations of TREs simple through standard community, open source, community-led services and APIs, but allow people to do their research in whatever secure environment is most appropriate. So there is a tension on this one at the moment, but my personal view is we will see a range develop from transitory project-led TREs through to highly specialized ones. For example, there will be some that will want to address where there are very high compute requirements, and you might want to build something highly specialized that is perhaps closely aligned with a HPC capability, and then up to the national level TREs that will come out of the NHS, out of ONS, out of the equivalent bodies in the other nations of the UK.
Excellent, very good response. Gerry, do you see within this structure that you just described, multi-layered approach to TRE formation, if you like, do you see a model whereby data will be stationary in its physical location? So we don't have to think about traveling data from one site to another, hence reducing its exposure to breach or to attacks, whatever. Rather, you would transfer processing to data repositories along the lines of a virtual cloud in the current technology in cloud computing. So processing transfers to where data is located. You do the necessary research on data, and once this is done, you take the processing elsewhere, and the new data will be saved where it was originally located. Or do you see a model whereby data will still continue to be dynamic, traveling from one site to another?
I think I think there's going to be both models. For me, the default should be that we minimize data travel, and therefore we should be moving compute and analysis to the data wherever we can. And there's some good examples of this already occurring. I think there are some cases, and it's really where we've got to do complex data linkage, where we need to aggregate data. Because there will be maybe electronic health records held in one place and imaging data in another place, and actually doing the complex approaches to distributed queries across the two is beyond the state of the art. So I think there will be a need to still move data, but I think we should be trying to make that the exception rather than the norm, for probably two reasons. The first is the one you highlight, which is as soon as we're starting to move data, we raise the levels of risk. The second is that as we look at the data that's there around imaging across all sorts of different domains, genomic data, increasingly Internet of Things data, these data sets are huge. The concepts of moving more than trivial elements of multi-petabyte data sets around is just not going to work. We just can't be in a model where we move or indeed replicate multi-petabyte data sets.
Fantastic, great. I did ask too many questions, and we're coming to the end of the session. Gerry, do you have any concluding remarks you want to tell the audience about, as far as the context of the session is about TREs and the future of research on personal sensitive data?
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope it's been useful to see the context of what trusted research environments have brought and are continuing to bring. I would encourage people to look at research opportunities here as well, not just from a point of view of this might be the type of environment you may encounter to do your research on sensitive data. But there is also some really important unanswered questions around how we build out an effective federated network of TREs across the UK. So think about the research opportunities here around how do you move processing to data? How could we automate output checking? How could we automate some of the governance around how we do research on automated data? How do you do risk modeling that takes into account public perception, the user, the risks around a user, the risks around an institution, perhaps, the risks around a project and the environment. So I would encourage you, I hope it's been a useful discussion, but I would encourage you not just to look at TREs from the perspective of this may be an environment in which I'll conduct research, but also look at this as a research opportunity in and of itself. We're on a journey. This is going to be still a discussion that will be going on in 5 years from now and in 10 years from now. Great research opportunity. So do look at this from both perspectives. And I hope it's been a good discussion. And I'm very happy to follow on with other questions later.
It has been a fantastic session. Thanks very much for this presentation, but also for the follow-up answers that you've provided. It has really clarified things, at least in my mind. I'm sure it will be beneficial to a much wider audience after the event. Thanks for sharing your vision as well for the future of TREs from your perspective. I'm very grateful, Gerry, for the time, and hopefully we'll be able to contribute to the DARE program in subsequent calls in the future. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you. Really appreciate having the opportunity.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.